Hi, this is Ashley Snell, and my final presentation is over the book The Servant by James Hunter. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. This is a quote from Jesus from the scriptures, Mark 10:43. Upon reading James C. Hunter's The Servant, Jesus' theology inspired the idea that a good leader is one that serves those that he leads, using authority over power and establishing a genuine love for those underneath him. This presentation will explain further what exactly occurs in The Servant and how this book serves as a tool to learn the essence of becoming an effective leader. This book takes us on a journey through spirituality and self-transformation that makes what I believe to be an exceptional leader. We'll then look at what the strengths and weaknesses of the book are and how those affect the types of audiences that would gain from reading The Servant. So first, here's a brief summary about the author, James C. Hunter. He basically is just a teacher of servant leadership, and he teaches it to different firms all over the world, some of them including American Express, McDonald's, Johnson & Johnson, and Microsoft, just to name a couple of the most well-known. So this book, I think, was written to provide a guide that truly teaches ways to improve leadership skills through mostly self-assessment and transformation, both mentally and spiritually. This book isn't really your basic how-to guide, but it shows through real characters that readers are able to see the elements that go into becoming an effective leader. I think mostly this book was intended for anyone in any sort of leadership role, but beyond that, anyone wanting to better their relationships with other people. The Servant provides so much relevance to relationships and what causes them to go awry, and then what it takes from individuals to repair them. There's a lot of self-analysis in here that throughout the book that anyone wanting to change could benefit from reading this. The synopsis of the book basically is, as I mentioned before, not a how-to or even a book with suggestions on good leadership techniques. Instead, it's really just a story about a businessman named John Daly and how he repairs his life that seems to be falling apart at the seams. He's a general manager of a thriving company with plenty of money and seems to have it all, except that his workers are on strike, his children are acting out, and his wife is threatening to leave him. Reluctantly, John attends a monastery where he spends a week and learns more from one monk about leadership than he'd ever known. We learn about everyday, real-life displays of poor leadership through the other attendees of the monastery and can relate to their struggles. As John transforms throughout the week, we learn along with him about so many facets of leadership and relationships in life. So let me start by saying that this book truly has more of a real insight into molding yourself into a good leader than I have time to really talk about. Hopefully, though, I can touch on some of the main points that Hunter presents to John through the monk at the monastery. So the first concept that the monk taught his students was basically just the difference between power and authority. And I know they sound similar, but as we've learned in our class and as we can see here from these definitions, the main difference between the two is that authority is a learned skill, and it allows people to willingly make the choice to go along with your will because you ask them to do it. Obviously, this is preferred over power because power eventually erodes relationships, and those relationships are so key in having a successful working environment or just a successful relationship in general. So secondly, the group at the monastery collectively came up with a definition of leadership, and they defined it as the skill of influencing people to work enthusiastically toward goals identified as being for the common good. The key to leadership is accomplishing tasks while building relationships. Healthy businesses require healthy relationships. Not to mention that leadership is a choice. And in the book, it really talks about how we do make choices to become leaders, whether it be to be a mom or a coach or a spouse. And it's critical that we take those roles very seriously because of how much of other people's lives our time as leaders affects them. So the next concept that the monk really touched on, and it made a lot of sense, was that the focus of an organization should be to serve the customer. Up here we have two different paradigms, the old and the new. And as you can see with the old paradigm, it has a CEO at the top, and all the employees look up to please the CEO rather than down to please the customers. The pyramid should be flipped, as in the new paradigm, with the CEO looking at how he can better serve the vice presidents and the vice president's middle managers, and so on, until ultimately the employees have everything they need to best serve the customers. A quote from the book that I really liked was one that said, "Too many managers spend their careers getting in the way instead of getting things out of the way." The next is the leadership model, and as you can see, that leadership starts from something really small and works its way up to becoming really what it is. The model itself is built on will, and the will to do something is important. And one of the references made in The Servant is to Ken Blanchard's book, The 1 Minute Manager. And he says that intentions minus actions equals squat, which means if you have good intentions but you never do anything about them, they don't really amount to anything. But instead, intentions and actions equal will. So a quote from the book that I think personifies this is, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions." This tells us so much that as leaders we have to go so far beyond our thoughts and put our beliefs really into action for it to make a difference. So you may have noticed from the leadership model that after will comes love. The monk at the monastery goes very in depth on this concept, as it is not the love we think of automatically that has to do with feeling, like how you feel toward your boyfriend or your husband. But in this case, it's to be viewed as a verb. We can't always control how we feel about people, but we can control how we treat them. The idea of love from this comes from the New Testament, and it's the Greek word agape, which is used a lot throughout the Bible. And its definition in The Servant is that it is unconditional love rooted in behavior towards others without regard for their due. So, as said in 1 Corinthians, I know we've all heard it time and time again, that love is patient, love is kind, does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth, etc. I'm sure we can all relate to not treating someone with kindness or even giving them the time of day just because we don't think that they deserve it. So what this book suggests is that we aren't the deciders of who deserves kindness and respect, and should treat everyone with the core of human personality, which is the need of appreciation. So after learning all of these different things from The Servant, I think that you can tell from all the concepts and ideas that about on leadership that this is a pretty reliable source. And we've seen a lot of these ideas in other places, and I think that James Hunter writes this technically from his own point of view, but his views are so heavily guided by really great leaders, the best being Jesus, and others like Gandhi and other writers like that were referenced earlier that have written other things about leadership. I think several of the concepts that we've learned in our course were evident in this book, and mainly we learned about communication, and there really was an essence of that in almost every point of this book. There was also an emphasis placed on listening, which is such a crucial part of communication, as we've learned. Overall, I'd say that this book was a good supplement to our textbook and what we've learned throughout this class. Along with that, I think the strengths and weaknesses of this book play into how well the reader would perceive the information presented. Because of the format of the book being more of a novel read rather than an informative guide, it could be good or bad depending on the audience. And I felt it was easier to connect with and link together all the different aspects while following John's journey than it would have been to have read it as a list. Other people may have liked more of an outline format with black and white lists of do's and don'ts, and that may play into a weakness for those people. Another thing that this book really relies on is spiritual guidance, and I think that for those people that rely on that this was a really good way of implementing what they believe. But for some people, it may have deterred them from gaining a full understanding and application of what the author is trying to get at. So what's interesting was whenever I was selecting a book for this project, I had intending on reading Dave Ramsey's EntreLeadership because I've just heard so much about it and I'm a really big fan of his. And whenever I was at Barnes & Noble looking for that book, I found this one and really was intrigued by the title, The Servant. And I had remembered from one of our units about the style of leadership and kind of seemed to like it. So after flipping through a couple pages, I decided to purchase the book, and I really couldn't have been happier with my choice. I definitely recommend this book to anyone with a willingness to learn about themselves and implement changes that would help them become a better leader and a better human being. Thank you.